is a very Monday-ish Monday today. It's grey outside, it's gloomy, it's cold. There's a hint of despair and foreboding in the air. It's just not a great start to the week in general. I'm not going to be going out today, I don't think. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot. So I was actually catching up with Jess's Vlogmas this morning. Jess, Sunbeam's Jess, queen of Vlogmas, I think, undisputed, no questions there. And it reminded me that I was going to talk about some books. So that I thought was the perfect thing to do today. Perfect excuse, bit of a bookish, stay inside with a cup of tea reading kind of day anyway. So the perfect time to discuss everything that I've read today. And that is what we're going to do. I'm going to go through my year reading list. I haven't read a lot by some people's standards, but I actually have completed my Goodreads challenge this year. I set myself 12 books, which is 2 more than last year. I say 12, some of these books, they're a series, I'll talk about them in a second, but I don't know if they should really count as, how many is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books. I'd say they should more count as one, so perhaps we haven't quite met the 12 mark, but I'm just going to go through what I've read. And a lot of these, I have to say, are from quite early on in the year. I had a big reading moment in the first couple of months, a big gap, and then I read a few more later on at the end of the year. So I've actually got some notes on my phone that I'm going to have to keep referring back to that I was keeping while I was reading them, just to sort of jog my memory. Okay, let's start with book number 1, which was The Binding by Bridget Collins. I was absolutely fascinated by the premise of this book. It all revolves around this very mystical, very magical practice of bookbinding, which is where people can have their memories bound into a book so that they forget. Books become these very forbidden, taboo items to possess, and not a lot of people have access to them. That sounded to me, and still sounds, so incredibly intriguing and fascinating, and I just want to know more about that. Unfortunately, this book, I mean, for the first third, that is all it is about, and we really kind of delve into that, the kind of whats and wheres and how, why. You kind of get drip fed little bits, enough to kind of keep you hooked and keep you wanting to read more. And then it switches. This book is marketed obviously as this very fantastical fantasy read, but it's actually a romance. If you're going to do a romance, but don't try and make it out to be something that it's not. If I were just judging this, as the romance genre, it's an interesting story. It kept me gripped. I wanted to know the ending, I carried on reading and I did finish it. I just was disappointed, I guess. I was disappointed that there were a lot of unanswered questions. The most interesting character in this, I think, who is the bookbinder. The main character is the bookbinder's apprentice who goes off to learn about this craft and learns everything from this very old, ancient woman who, is very mysterious and very interesting. You don't find out much about her after the first kind of quarter of the book, and that was such a shame to me. So I finished it. It was okay. It is a #1 bestseller. I just feel like I was very missold, and it's frustrating because this could have been so much more. I felt like going down the route of just making it a romance was a very, uninteresting way of finishing the book. But then again, some people loved this. Some people absolutely loved it. I don't often give negative reviews to books, and I don't often feel that negatively about things. I tend to just feel kind of so-so, but that one kind of frustrated me. It did. So the second book I read, I don't actually have with me. I am pretty sure I've loaned it to somebody. I couldn't find it anywhere, so we're just gonna pretend it's here. I have had High Fidelity by Nick Hornby on my shelves for literal years. I've moved from flats to houses to flats with it, and I've just never read it. It's very different to any book I've personally ever read. There's a very heavy male internal dialogue. So our main character, Rob, is this kind of commitment phobe, very adolescent at times. He's basically kind of a prick. A character who you would absolutely hate normally unless you completely identified with them, I guess. And a character that I wasn't expecting to enjoy reading, but actually really did. I feel like the book is really helped by the fact that it is very funny, it's very blunt. There's some one-liners in there that it made me laugh out loud. That's rare for a book. The book starts with Rob listing his top 5 breakups of all time. And there's a lot of list making in this book. There's a lot of music, actually. It's very heavily music influenced. He works in a record shop, and that becomes a big theme within the book. There's so many songs listed. I feel like there should be, or there probably is, some kind of playlist on Spotify where you could go through them all. Very abstract bands as well, very classic songs at some points, but you know, things that you may not necessarily have known, but all, you know, heavily 90s, which is when the book is set. And I liked the vibe that gave the story. It's actually set pretty much where I live. It's set in North London, in an area I'm really familiar with, so it was kind of cool to see that. It's actually kind of funny that I had that book for so long and it was just sitting on my shelf, and I ended up here where I am. Never expected to move to London, live here now, and that book's kind of been following me around, basically telling me where it was going to end up. Strange little incidental anecdote there. So yeah, there's a lot of commentary on women from the male perspective in this book, which, I don't know, at times it makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. I think the point is, though, the way in which he's talking about them is so much more of a reflection on himself. And, you know, there's a big kind of, not coming of age sort of story, because he's a grown man, you know, but he matures and he is introspective and starts to think more about himself. You know, I liked it. I did. I found it very fun to read. I found it upbeat and fast paced, and just, I enjoyed it a lot. I also really liked the film. I am a big John Cusack fan. Serendipity did that for me. They've actually made a series too with Zoe Kravitz, and it's like a gender flip, so she plays the main character. I haven't seen it, but I think it's something I'm going to watch because it looks really great. I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it. I think it is kind of a bit of a cult classic, so there's a lot of people who have read it, and I see why. I feel there's a good reason why. So next we have Dolly Alderton's Ghosts. I don't tend to read a lot of these kind of like new modern fictions. I don't want to call them like modern day chick lit because I feel like that's a bit insulting. This was very relatable to me, actually. Again, it's set in North London, and it's about Nina, who's in her 30s. It's, you know, it deals with dating, relationships, family, and I really like the character, actually. That's what kind of stood out to me a lot about this book. I don't often tend to like characters or the protagonists of novels. I really liked Nina. I did. I enjoyed reading about her. I liked her relationships. I liked her approach to life. There are some super relatable and incredibly accurate depictions of modern day dating in this. So she's single and she's kind of using Tinder and the dating apps. I'm not sure if it's called Tinder in this, maybe, or some other made up name. The central relationship in this, it's almost like a mirror of my life and my experiences when I was single. There are definitely parts of this that I read and I just thought, that is so true. I literally several times went and held this book up to Joe and said, read this. This is what men are like. This is men. Obviously the book is called Ghosts, which, you know, it's heavily implied that there is ghosting involved in this, but it's not just in the way that you would expect, you know, romantically. It's also in the way that, you know, other relationships in your life can experience ghosting, friends and family, and people's situations changing, their circumstances becoming different when you first met them, and kind of creating divides between you, which I really enjoyed. I found those parts of the book interesting. It's a good, easy read. I kind of flew through it, but didn't rush with it. I took my time, picked it up maybe over the course of a week, and I just really enjoyed reading it. I thought it was really good. I have not actually read Dolly Alderton's Everything I Know About Love, which is a huge book, very popular. I do have it somewhere, actually, so maybe I'll give that a read next. But yeah, I really like Ghosts. It's probably one of my favourites from the year. Next is another book from Nick Hornby. So after High Fidelity, I did a little bit of looking into Nick Hornby, and wanted to read more from him just because I enjoyed it so much. And I settled on this, which I think it must be his latest. Let me just check when it came out. It came out in 2020, so yeah, this is very new. This is definitely one of those 21st century love stories that has a lot more to it than just boy meets girl and falls in love, you know. There's a deeper meaning running through it. In particular, in this story, we have Lucy, who is in her 40s, I think, and Joseph, who is 22. So there's a big divide in age difference, generations, but there's also this huge divide in class and culture as well. Lucy's white and Joe is black. He's from a very different part of London than she is, but they come together in spite of their differences, and it's, you know, it's kind of the story of them. So that separately would be a good interesting read. You know, the way this is marketed, the cover, the illustration. It's very kind of like pick me, reminds me a lot of the Ghosts cover actually. So you think it's just going to be, you know, nice, North London again. All Nick Hornby's novels I think are set in North London. Romance, a little bit of turmoil, a little bit of difficulty, but we'll see how it ends up in the end. However, there is a lot of mentions of Brexit in this. So it's set in 2016. During the Brexit referendum. I think people haven't quite voted yet, but there's a lot of debate and discussion on what's going to happen. And that for me just pulled me out of this story immediately. I mean, not only because and I think everybody in this country is sick of talking about Brexit, sick of hearing about it, just sick of it. But it's kind of like when people mention the pandemic nowadays in TV shows, so in the new Sex and the City reboot and Just Like That. They mention the pandemic a lot, and as soon as that happens, I'm just totally withdrawn from the story, and I know that I'm watching something. It's too soon, I think. It's too soon. Will it ever not be too soon? I don't know. But there was a similar thing happened with this. They keep mentioning Brexit, and it just becomes about something different. I guess there's parallels being drawn between this relationship, between these two people, and the relationship between the Remain and Leave voters. That's what Nick Hornby's getting at. I don't know, I feel like this wanted to be a story about Brexit, but the only way to do it was to dress it up as a love story, as a romance. Without that, there's not much that really happens in this, honestly, and I don't know if it's worth reading. You know, 350 odd pages. I didn't hate it, and I got through it. I think I read this, you know, in an evening. I picked it up at bed, read a chapter or so. It wasn't something that made me want to carry on reading past my bedtime and stay up and finish it. It was just kind of so-so. And yeah, every time they said Brexit, I kind of winced a little bit. So I don't know, I'm sure Nick Hornby has much better novels than this. I probably just started or picked out the wrong one for my second read. Okay, next. Something different, very different for me. This is a thriller, a crime thriller, in fact, I guess we could say. I do not read books like this, so I have such little knowledge of the genre. I think I've probably read 2 thrillers in my life. They're just not for me. I'm a, you know, sensitive, dispositioned, anxiety-ridden little person, and books and any stories really, shows, films, stay with me probably too much, you know. There's an episode of Black Mirror I probably watched about 12 years ago that I still think about almost daily. I mean, that's the level of sensitivity I am at. So yeah, the only thing that possessed me to pick this up was the fact that once again it is set in an area of London that I am very familiar with. I must have googled books set in blank and just read them all. I think that's what I must have done, because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 books. I'm not sure how that happened. Anyway, I kind of familiar with this story because I've not seen the film with Nicole Kidman. I think Colin Firth is in it as well, but I know of the story. So basically, it's about a woman, Christine, who has amnesia. It's a very specific and very fictional type of amnesia, although I'm sure 1 or 2 people have experienced this, where every day when she wakes up, she forgets. So she has an entire day and then doesn't retain any of that information, wakes up and she's back, you know, years ago in her mind. That's an interesting plot device to begin a story with, particularly a thriller. I won't go into detail with it because, you know, obviously with this type of book, you don't want to give anything away. I don't want to spoil anything for you. I have to say it was gripping. I read this in a day and I just had to know what happened. I had to get to the end. There are parts of this that are quite frustrating, and I guess it's maybe supposed to be that way to mirror the frustration of the character not being able to remember what's happening, not knowing what's going on with her, but also frustrating to the point that there's some very unrealistic and unbelievable parts. And I get that, you know, you've got to take some, okay, I think Moon's having a bad dream, some fictional liberties, I guess, but you know, it was sort of far-fetched to the point that it again drew me out of it. And I can read an entire sci-fi or fantasy fiction book where there's all this ridiculous magic and mystery and space travel going on. Absolutely believable for me. When something happens in a more, you know, down-to-earth kind of book, it's too much. I don't understand why. Incredibly suspenseful though, a little bit like jarring and scary at times. I don't like it when I'm scared by books. It's difficult to keep reading, but I have to say it has a very satisfying ending. I like it when books end in the way I want them to. That's all I say about that. I enjoyed it. I'm not going to make it a habit of reading thrillers, but I enjoyed it. So after that, we come to the series that I read. These were kind of broken up by some other books that I have, but I'll talk about them all in one go. So I kind of got to a point this year where I was having incredibly bad anxiety and insomnia at bedtime. Just somebody mentioning, you know, should we go to bed, was a big trigger for me, and yeah, I got very scared of bedtimes. It's kind of subsided now, and it's something that I've always had problems with, and I'm sure it will come back. But what I was doing was reading, so I didn't want to watch anything because I feel like that just makes me too awake. I wanted to try and make myself sleepy. Obviously reading is the best thing for that. But I didn't want to read anything that was going to keep me in that anxious state, and honestly, anything could have done that. So I wanted something that was going to be the most kind of like PG, warm hug of a book possible. And I actually picked up a book from a series that I read when I was a child, The Princess Diaries by Cabot. I don't know if I should be a little bit embarrassed about talking about these, although I did mention that I was rereading these on Instagram, and so many of you said that you used to love them, they were your favourite books when you were growing up. I thought this was a bit of a niche series. Obviously there is the film, which is a huge deal, and honestly one of my all-time favourites. But I thought the books were maybe a little bit less heard of, but apparently not. I basically would class what I did as comfort reading, similar to just putting Friends on in the background, something that makes you feel good, that you know what's going to happen, that is very predictable. I really enjoyed these, so much so that I actually read 5 of them. These are the originals that I have had since I must have been maybe like 11 or 12 when I started reading these. I mean, there are parts of these that are out of date, and I thought, as a 29-year-old, am I going to enjoy this? Is it a little bit too young? But it's fun and it's silly, and the main character, Mia, has these, you know, probably over the top and slightly ridiculous ideas about feminism, but she kind of sticks to her morals and she's strong. I mean, she's incredibly frustrating at times and over dramatic, more so than I remember her being, more so than Anne Hathaway is in the film. Still very lovable, and God, I cannot recommend, whether it's to help with sleep or anxiety or not, just for a trip down memory lane, picking up a series that you used to read and just reliving it. There are a lot of these. I haven't read all of them, but I think I have them all tucked away somewhere. And I'm sure they have made an adult version as well. Maybe it was later on after the full series was published. I think they actually made one where she's older, she's in her 20s, and I think it's not a children's book, it's actually aimed at adults, so it's probably got a different vibe. But you know, maybe I'll get through them, maybe I'll read that one. If you've read it, let me know if it's good. So let's talk about my favourite book of the year. Undoubtedly, undisputedly, and maybe my, you know, this could easily be up there now in my top books of all time. Which is a big deal. I've not read anything recently that I would class as being an all-time favourite. Most of those are from years and years ago. So it is Dune by Frank Herbert. So this is a very epic, complex, fantastical sci-fi fantasy fiction. The basic premise of which is that there's a planet, the planet Arrakis, otherwise known as Dune, where the most valuable and rare commodity in the universe is found, and the stewardship of this planet is passed over from house to house. There's a lot of Game of Thrones parallels in this in terms of the different houses, and you really get that feel for the different families in it. So it's passed over to the Atreides family and to Paul Atreides as a father, and then the story kind of just unfolds from there. I haven't read something this kind of world building and big and, you know, so much to digest within it type of novel for so long, probably since I've read Game of Thrones. And when I read that, I just love to get into something so meaty and vast, you know, something where there are so many details to be picked up on, so many little mentions of things that maybe don't come back for another, you know, 300-400 pages. I love that, and a lot of people I know find that incredibly tedious. This book is or will be a struggle for a lot of people to get through. It's incredibly dialogue heavy, there's so much political talk, and all the characters have really, you know, really heavy internal monologues. There's so much thought and kind of just an endless stream of consciousness going on in a lot of this, which is hard to keep up with. It's confusing. There are parts of it I had to reread. It's also one of those books that creates its own language in places, so there are words that you don't know and you kind of just have to work them out for yourself. That's the way that a book just draws me in so deeply that you know, it's all I can think about. I'm reading it, and when I'm away from it, you know, it's still turning around in my mind. The characters are great in this. I feel like they are very fleshed out and you really do get to know them. There's a lot of strong female characters in this too, which I appreciate for such an old novel. I think this is from the 60s. It really is the original blueprint for all future kind of sci-fi and fantasy, and you really see that in this. You pick up on places where, you know, you feel like that has then since been done a lot, but this is truly where it began. Yeah, I won't go too much into the story because there's just so much to talk about, but it's a very kind of, it almost has slightly medieval imagery, which, you know, when you cross that over with something that's sci-fi and very modern and set in space and on different planets and different worlds, you know, it's a really interesting combination. You know, there's houses and dukes and ladies, and there's also laser guns and laser shields and things like that, and some witches too. If you're up to it and if you have the capacity to fit something so complex into your mind, I highly recommend it. And obviously the film came out recently. I don't think I've ever seen such an accurate adaptation from a book to a film. I honestly think it's the best I've ever seen. There are parts that are slightly different. There are things they mixed around, things they left out. You're quite comfortable there. But it was exactly, almost identical to how I pictured it in my mind, which I think is really interesting because it's not often that happens. It's the most beautiful film, one of the most beautiful films I think I've ever seen. The cinematography is stunning. And I also didn't realise they were splitting it into 2 parts, so it did end quite abruptly, and I thought, wow, that's why this was quite slow paced, because there's so much more to get through that we need another film. I'm glad that there is 2 films actually. I'm glad they split it up and they're going to do it justice and really include everything that should be included. I just don't want to wait another 2 years to see the next one. I do actually have the second in the series, so Dune is actually a series which I wasn't aware of. I'm not sure how many books there are, but there's a few. I think it got to a point where Frank Herbert's son actually carried on writing them when he died, and I think those books, while maintaining the same feel of this world, they're not quite as good or quite the same. But I think the first 3 are supposed to be worth reading. This is Dune Messiah. The difference in size is crazy. Look how much bigger this one is. I think I'll probably end up reading this next. So that brings us on to the final book of the year. Or not final yet because December isn't over, but it probably will be the final book of the year. I read this back in October, so it's been a good couple of months since I've picked anything new up. But this is Sally Rooney's Beautiful World, Where Are You? Probably the most anticipated book of the year, I'd say. So this is set in Dublin, for the most part, as are most, if not all, I think, of Sally Rooney's novels. And it revolves around 4 people, 2 men, 2 women, and how they know each other, come together, their relationships. And the main bulk of this novel is made up by Alice and Eileen, who are the women, and we kind of get a chapter of Alice, a chapter of Eileen, and then they are split up by emails between the 2, back and forth. The emails I found so incredibly tedious to read. They were the hardest part of this book to get through, because they are just an email from one person to the other, very long emails, kind of pretentious and self-indulgent, mostly to me. I really, you know, I got to the point where it would come to the end of a chapter and I'd have to read an email and I'd think, oh god, I don't know if I can get through the next 6 pages. The main chapters of this I really enjoyed. I wanted more of them. I didn't want them to be broken up and the story to kind of be halted so much. I got very invested in them and their stories. The dialogue, obviously, which is kind of a trademark of Sally Rooney, is very good, very fast paced, very quick, very witty, and very immersive. So I loved that, but then, like I said, I was so immersed and then I just got drawn out and a little bit bored when I was reading those in-between chapters. The same with her other 2 books. I feel like, and I don't know if this is just me, I feel like there's just no plot. I feel like nothing happens in them. And I guess that's kind of the point. They are just observations on people living their lives. I just don't know if that's enough to hold you in an entire novel. I loved Normal People, but I now think it may have been because I watched the adaptation first. I mean, the adaptation is just stunning. It's so incredible to watch. You know, it's an amazing piece of art. I read the book after seeing that, and I feel like maybe I fell in love with it so much because I was drawing from that adaptation, from those pictures I'd seen. I realised I'm a very visual person, and it's why I tend to connect more with a story if it is both in film and literature. You know, I have all the information and all the backstory and everything to read about in the novel, and then also I have the visuals to pull from the film. I feel like that to me has become, or it is quite an important part of my consuming books. But I don't want to offend any diehard Sally Rooners out there, because I know you are there. I think probably the anticipation of this book was a bit too much. I know I had it pre-ordered for months and I was really excited for it to come, and I read it straight away. Do you know what, actually saying that, I probably would read it again. It's nice to kind of just be in. I think that sums up Sally Rooney for me. She has the ability to create these worlds that you want to find yourself in. And that is what I'll say about that. So, those are the books that I read. Quite a varying selection, I think. I didn't just stick to one particular genre at all. I think next year I'm going to give myself a little bit more of a challenge. I'm going to maybe go somewhere in the 20s. I'd say if I did 12 this year, I'd say maybe we could do 24 next year. 2 a month. I think that's doable. I'll leave my Goodreads link down below for you guys. My username is just like Covet, as is everything, all my social media platforms. If you want to follow along with me, and then I can follow you and see what you're reading. I think really that's all I have for you today, so I'm probably going to leave the vlog here. I have talked for maybe 45 minutes, so I guess that's probably the wise thing to do. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Have you been laid out? Oh my god, you're a lump in the background of this video the whole time. What a life you lead. Shall we say goodbye to everyone? Okay. You're so limp. You're so sleepy, aren't you? Okay. Goodbye, guys. See you tomorrow.